Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news, a day of what could have been at Silverstone. All of the drivers on the front three rows all think they had an opportunity of pole position today, but amid all the chaos, one man again stands out. With all the drama over the last few days, is he going to leave Red Bull Racing? Christian Horner saying that it's a real possibility in the next couple of years. Horner will be smiling this evening with Max Verstappen back on pole position, and with the race pace looking very evenly matched across the board, who knows what's going to happen tomorrow. Hamilton had a very good chance indeed of sticking it on pole yet to get around this track, but it fell shy at the final couple of corners. Massively intrigued to your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I greatly appreciate it. We are going to dive right in and we're going to start here. Verstappen has been the big conversation point of the last few days. Toto absolutely interested in acquiring his services, and Horner has had to be on the defensive. He's saying, well, Max is a key part of our team. That's been the case for the last 10 years. Our intention is to keep that going, but one day, whether it's a year after or the year after that, there will be a day there is no more Max at Red Bull. And of course, they've got to prepare for that day because it's not an easy day. That will eventually arrive at some point. But Horner even admitting that, yeah, you know, maybe next year, maybe the year after, Max is going to go. It's a far cry from when Horner was always saying, we've got a contract. Max is here until 2028. I don't know what you guys are worried about. Horner is now very clear that, yeah, Max's future is in flux. But the more that he delivers results like today, the more that he's going to be tempted that, you know what, that Red Bull, as difficult as it may be, is still capable in his hands with the speed that is in the car somewhere, but it seems only Max is able to truly extract. And it's not like Russell didn't do a great job in the Mercedes today either, but a Mercedes which is not where they would have liked it to be, given they had a front row lockout Mercedes here at Silverstone last year. That may do something to sway Max's mind to stay at Red Bull for the time being. Horner also, though, says he was pressed on Max and says, well, can't guarantee where he's going to go, but can you guarantee where Russell's going to be at Mercedes? And if Max isn't at Mercedes next year, it's probably because his driver had something to say about it. He even said this, Horner, which if I'm Verstappen is a little bit concerning. To expect us to be ahead of Mercedes next year, it would be embarrassing for Mercedes if we were, or for any manufacturer, which is, if I'm hearing that and I'm Max, I'm a little bit skeptical to say the least, because what he's saying, I think, is fair. Red Bull powertrains with Ford coming online for the first time. There's not much optimism in that engine package and power unit for 2026 and the coming years. Whereas a team like a Mercedes, a Ferrari, for example, a pure manufacturing team, it would be pretty embarrassing to lose out to Red Bull powertrains coming in for the first time. But that makes it pretty clear to Max, right? Because if it's embarrassing if Red Bull powertrains next year and Red Bull deliver a car that is faster, certainly on the engine side, than what those other teams I've mentioned are capable of doing, then that implies that it's unlikely, right? Like, if it's embarrassing if Mercedes were to lose to Red Bull next year, then it's very unlikely that it happens purely by consequence, I would say. And as a result, that puts Verstappen, I would say, on some watch. Like, regardless of what's happening now, today will be a feel-good day for Max, feel-good day for Red Bull. Should it really matter in terms of Max's decision where he wants to be next year? That is a question that is worth asking. But practice gets underway. There are a few interesting things in practice today, really. The first thing to note was that Piastri was right back there again. Yesterday, Norris was definitely the faster. Today, Piastri felt like he was at least on equal playing field, maybe slightly quicker. Norris, again, as Hamilton did, and we'll get into that right in a few minutes' time here, right at the end of the final qualifying session. Again, the final couple of corners made a couple of errors that could have made a substantial difference. But the McLarens, they proved they were going to be there. And the final part of practice was interesting. I mean, it was absolute chaos actually out there today. Hamilton went purple-green. He was a tenth up on his teammate Charles Leclerc, who was P1 at this time. Then Behrman's car broke and a bit of flaw came on the track on the outside of Stowe. Hamilton didn't hit it, but it did cause a red flag. So they stopped the session and we didn't quite get to see what time Hamilton was actually capable of. This, though, was George Russell and that Mercedes looking like a bit of a nightmare. This was going into, like, coming out of farm into village, trying to break into turn 3. and having major issues with the car again was locking up into turn 3, a big issue that Mercedes seemed to suffer with pretty much the whole time, but it wasn't as bad as Bortoletto's crash. He went off at Beckett, finds himself barreling over, doing like a 720 turn through the grass runoff area there, hits a big bump from the back, it destroys his front left suspension, and he's into the gravel. So then the session stops, and the car was fixable, they got it fixed. Bortoletto again did a pretty solid job. The drama happens, though, with this man, Ollie Behrman, because Behrman decided that he was just going to send it into the pit lane to get some practice, right? Because pit stops are important around here. It feels, Silverstone, like a very long pit lane because it's 60 kph and it's a long pit lane, which it is. But because you cut out the final couple of corners, it actually doesn't lose you that much time in the pit. So, a couple of stops tomorrow is definitely possible here. And Behrman, because he wanted to get some practice on the entry, decided to use the red flag as a nice opportunity to send it into the pit lane, brake hard, and get ready, of course, for tomorrow, because that's what you want to do in a Grand Prix without giving yourself too much leeway one way or the other, or braking too late and speeding in the pit lane. But his brakes were a little bit cooler than he would have expected, or that he should have known, let's be honest, and he recognised that himself. But during the red flag session, he comes into the pits at real top speed, basically, tries to slam on the brakes, loses the car, takes off his front wing, and causes damage for really no reason at all. And as a result of this, Behrman was given another 10-place penalty for a red flag infringement. Now, this is mostly, I would say, justified. The stewards have made it very clear that under a red flag, don't mess around, and if you do, we will punish you and punish you harshly. And that's what they say. All cars must reduce speed and proceed slowly back to the pit lane under a red flag. That is what is required in the International Sporting Code. It is beyond doubt that the driver did not proceed slowly back to the pit lane when he accelerated to simulate entering into the pit entry road under race conditions. In fact, we looked at a previous in-lap under normal racing conditions and found that he was actually faster this time under a red flag. To make matters worse, he lost control of the car, crashed into the barriers while at speed. The driver informed us of this fact, but his brakes were cool, but that was not a mitigating factor. So it's a remarkable incident because on some level, Behrman's only hurt himself. Like, it was under a red flag, he made the infringement, he crashed his own car, and, it was obviously a disaster for him. But the stewards have made it very clear, any messing around under a red flag, breaking of the rules, you are going to get done, and that's what he got done for. I will say, he got 4 penalty points for this, and 4 penalty points is a lot. It's about as many as you're ever going to get. So he was already on 4, and he's now picked up another 4. Just to keep in mind, Max crashing into George back in Spain, that was given 3 penalty points at the time. So, one might argue that infringing and crashing your own car, with your own fault in a free practice session shouldn't be worth 4 points. I think 4 penalty points feels a bit harsh, but, it's in the guidelines. It is what it is. That's what happened, and Behrman will have to live and learn from it. And the frustrating thing for Behrman is that he was on smoke today. Like, you guys know that I'm a big fan of Ollie Behrman and his speed and his potential, and he's been really competitive against Ocon so far this season, which has really impressed me. But today, he was on fire, and so unfortunately for him, he'll be starting near enough the back of the grid. Like, it's not unfortunately, he caused the issue himself, but Behrman ended that section, or in 6th. He was 6/10 off the pace. Tsunoda was actually 5th. The Red Bull definitely looking better, but still a bit of a handful, and Hamilton would have been right there with Leclerc if not for the red flag. Now, this was noted as well, and I think whatever the frustrations will be today for Ferrari, I think what they have shown is that they have made some serious progress, and it's definitely true around this track and in qualifying as well. The fact that Hamilton was even in the hunt for pole today would not have been the case a while ago. Before the floor upgrade, that was not possible, right? Ferrari's car, just in qualifying trim especially, was just nowhere near competitive enough. Today, both of the Ferrari drivers will feel like they should have had a chance had they cleaned up their lap better. And Auto Racer confirm that the rise heights that they used yesterday in FP2, when the car was looking very solid, was the same as today, which shows that they're confident plank wear won't be an issue and they can get away with it. I know there will be some frustration given the way they're starting, especially that maybe, all right, Hamilton, all right, Leclerc, you've got a to lift and coast for a few laps to protect the plank, protect the brakes, whatever, could be an absolute disaster. But hopefully that doesn't happen tomorrow and these guys can race properly, because on paper the race pace should very much be there. And interestingly enough, the SF25's data is showing the performance that they expected of it back in the winter. So it seems as if they made this car, they saw the data they thought they would see. That never actually arrived in reality. They've brought the floor upgrade and it has delivered what they expected, and the car is now where they expected it to be at the start of the season. We are now halfway through the year after this Grand Prix, so it's far from optimal, but maybe some signs for optimism among Fred Vasseur and his team. But let's get into qualifying, because it was absolute chaos, to be honest. Q1 gets underway, and okay, usual suspects. The one outlier really here was Alonso. Alonso had a really good time in the first part of qualifying, but the times got drastically quicker than a 1:26.0. Tsunoda was again flirting with danger, but he did manage to make it through. One man though that didn't was Franco Colapinto, and this is a particularly big deal, right? He loses it at the final corner. It's always a tricky corner, that one. You can lose the rear, but the way that he lost the rear, he was so far over the curb that it was pretty inevitable that the rear was not going to stick for him as he was bouncing over the curb, especially at full throttle. He loses the car, he's in the barriers, he damages his end plate that you guys can see, and then he pulled over to the side of the road. So massively frustrating for Colapinto, especially given all the pressure. I just wanted to show this because he was like, this is where he was at full power. Like, you're not going to get away with that. You want to be at least, your tyre at this point wants to be on the black and white curb, not over here, otherwise you're really flirting with danger. And this was Flavio Briatore, the man who kind of made these decisions and told Colapinto, look, when you join the team for doing, I want no crashes, I want points, and I want consistency. He's had crashes, he's basically scored no points, and he's not really had much consistency. So it's tough for Colapinto to make a case right now that he's been better than Doohan. The reality is he hasn't, and Doohan, I'm sure, will feel hard done by, and for good reason at that as well. It does raise the question, I just saw this article floating around today about Valtteri Bottas. Rumour has it that, yeah, they are in negotiations, and Bottas has confirmed that there are discussions being had. So, yeah, welcome Valtteri Bottas to Alpine next year, possibly. Time will tell. But Q1 concludes, and Leclerc was under a yellow flag infringement investigation. That never went anywhere. But it was Behrman who started to put in, like, he put in a stellar lap, Behrman. There was talk about, he's only done it just because the track evolution. But, like, that was legit. That was a legitimately very impressive lap time. The big drama in Q1, though, was about Ferrari, because the idea of Hamilton getting pole today was a genuine possibility. But it may well never have happened if Ferrari seemingly got their way and somehow got their drivers knocked out in Q1, because Hamilton, the first part of qualifying, the Ferraris just weren't that quick, and Hamilton was down here in P13. He did a lap, and it was okay, but it wasn't good. And then the team told him, yeah, sorry, Lewis, we can't do another lap because we've got no fuel. We didn't fuel you for 2 runs. So we've just got to hope and pray that we get away with it. And, thankfully they did. Colapinto was out. Lawson didn't get a good lap in here either. Stroll goes out. So, there were, thankfully for Hamilton anyway, some other drivers that did get knocked out instead. But this was a real flirting with danger for Ferrari. And although they might look back at the day and say that they made it work, man, they were very lucky, I think, today, Ferrari, to not have an absolute disaster class. But Q1 finishes, Behrman's 3rd, Albon's 4th, Alonso's 5th, so that was one thing to keep an eye on. Verstappen, by the way, just to mention it now before I forget, he was running a very low downforce setup. This guy is like 7-8 kph faster in a straight line than anybody else, and in the high speed, yes, the wing is low, but the floor generates loads of the downforce at high speed, and therefore he can still about maintain it. And of course, Max doing Max things. In the low speed, he's losing boatloads of time. But in the high speed, he's so difficult to stop. And frankly, tomorrow will be very, very difficult to overtake. If it rains, changes the dynamics, because in the wet, the more downforce you have, almost always the better. But this was Q2 with Leclerc, a second off Max. Yeah, it was used tyres, but it was confusing why they went about it, Ferrari, in the way that they did. Norris then goes P1. Piastri was right in the mix as well, and all of a sudden both of the Ferraris are in the drop zone, struggling to even make it in. They did eventually make it, but I think the way that Brake Boosted said it was maybe fair to say the way that Ferrari have gone about this puts their drivers under so much pressure. Like, if there was a yellow flag, if there was a red flag, if there was some sort of drama, they both would have been out in Q2. So like, Q1 was very sketchy, Q2 was pretty sketchy, and then Q3 it finally all came alive. Verstappen and Piastri were basically neck and neck. And then we saw Q2 conclude with Hamilton going to the top. Now, these, the Ferraris decided to do runs towards the end, the others didn't, but it was pretty clear here. And the frustrating thing for Hamilton will be that if he just improved on this lap time right here by 10th and a half, he would have been on pole, or certainly right there, whereas his actual final run wasn't quite as strong. Well, it was until it wasn't. Now, Mercedes had a very interesting day, and frankly, a very interesting weekend so far. Antonelli was pretty quick. Russell delivered a really, really good lap, I think, when it matters, and that's definitely deserving of some credit today. But at this point, Antonelli and Russell were, finishing the session, but they were behind Piastri, they were behind Behrman, Alonso. Gasly was there in the mix as well. Tsunoda went out in P12, which was honestly for him not an absolute disaster. Half a second off Max used to put you fourth, but half a second off Max nowadays puts you P12. He did, to be fair to Yuki, out-qualify both of the Racing Bulls. So he out-qualified Hacho and out-qualified Lawson, which is something, at least I suppose, to take away. But Q3 gets underway. Piastri puts in a great banker, a 124.9. Lando was just a bit deep into turn 3, and then he did it again. That's what confused me. Lando made a couple of errors, again raising questions about Norris's ability to execute under pressure, because when it mattered, final qualifying session, again a couple of errors crept in. Wasn't the end of the world today for Lando, for sure, but not where he would have liked to have been. Russell did a really good job. I think Russell's lap might have been one of the best ones out there, because for him to end up as he was, within the ballpark, was very impressive. Hamilton's first lap was nice, 125 low, but definitely could go better, and he did for a large part of the second session. But then these were the final runs. Piastri had a solid lap, but it wasn't as good as his initial one. Norris, this was the big error really here from Lando. It was actually through the final corner. So what Hamilton did is he took too much on the entry. He went too wide, caught a little bit of grass, unsettled the car slightly, Hamilton, and then that kind of compromised his run, probably put a bit of grass on his tyres, and meant that the first and the second part of club were not ideal. Lando just took so much curb on the inside. You can get away with taking a fair bit of curb there, but he was a bit too greedy, took too much curb, unsettled the car, probably lost him, I would say, at least a 10th and a half really going through club, and the consequences of that. That was the big error for Norris. He ends up at a 125.0, not the lap that he wanted. Piastri couldn't really improve, but Hamilton was flying. He was purple first sector by a couple of tenths. Middle sector was very solid, and as I say, Hamilton comes through Stowe and is looking really pretty much there going into the final couple of corners, but again, too much on the entry to club, and then has a bit of a moment on the exit as well, just can't get the power down. So super frustrating, I'm sure, for Hamilton, because the way, his lap was so good, and he, I'm sure, felt like pretty much at one with the car. Like, he's been talking about that, how he feels much more comfortable over the last couple of weekends, finally getting to grips with what this car wants to do, and he had an opportunity today. It may not have been quite good enough for pole, but it would have been right there, and it would have been a front row with Max and Lewis, which would have been absolute cinema for tomorrow's Grand Prix. But unfortunately for us fans, maybe, that didn't happen. And Hamilton ends up a 10th off Piastri at the time, just ahead of Leclerc, who was also frustrated with his lap. But the man of the moment was, again, Mr. Max Verstappen, who went purple. Lost a bit of time in the final sector, probably pushing the tyres a bit too hard, but it didn't matter. He held on, set to 124.8, half a second off the lap record of Hamilton in 2020, but still very good to take pole position at Silverstone. What a quali session it was. You couldn't split these guys, really. Any one of the top 6 drivers could have got pole. Russell, admittedly, kind of came from nowhere. For him to be a 10th off Max, with the way that the Mercedes was, I thought was actually very competitive and very impressive. And both Ferraris being behind a Mercedes will be super frustrating for them, because I'm sure they felt like tomorrow was possibly going to be a straight-up Ferrari versus McLaren fight. It may not look like that when the Grand Prix gets underway. Leclerc was fuming about everything. Hamilton was on the radio because he made a mistake in the final corner. This was Leclerc, who, as he comes out the exit of the final corner, he has a bit of a moment, like he loses the car a little bit. And it wasn't maybe like a massive thing, but it was enough that he knew that it was going to cost him his chances. And then Hamilton, his boy Riccardo Adami on the radio says, we're P4, 1/10 to P1, all in the last corner. Otherwise, you were right there. And then a couple of seconds later, he says that was actually 2/10 because Max just took pole, and Lewis appears to say sorry on the radio.
Was 1/10 to P1. only last corner, otherwise you were there and thereabout. And P5.
Of course, Hamilton felt like he could have done better, but he wasn't too devastated about it. He says the lap was pretty decent at the end. I lost a bit of time in the last corner, which probably would have put me on the front row, or at least into third. We were right on the knife's edge. Other than that, I squeezed everything I could have done out of the car. So I think Hamilton, yeah, he will feel like obviously made an error at the final corner. It's frustrating, but he wasn't the only one to struggle in that Ferrari, right? And as Leclerc said, I don't know about pole, but I think I could have found 2/10 maybe to get the front row. Now, I've got really tired of coming here to say there's been something wrong. I don't have the same feeling I had with the car in Quali last year. So Leclerc feeling that there's something with that Ferrari that's slightly amiss. Hamilton also went on to say, I definitely feel a lot better in the car this weekend. The track's incredible. The crowd's been amazing, as he always says. I wish naturally we need a bit more, another 10th of performance, just to edge us closer. Dream of a podium tonight. We'll see if we can execute. The weather's going to be interesting. I will just quickly mention, this was the delta after the first sector. So Hamilton was purple, but then Verstappen took it away from him on his flying lap. After the second sector, Hamilton was actually down on what would eventually be Verstappen's pole time by a couple of tenths. Leclerc was, I mean, everyone was down by a couple of tenths on Verstappen's time. And before the final corner, here was Max. Now, Max, because he was running such low downforce, those final couple of corners, he was always going to lose time. So, before the final corner, Hamilton was down about, 2/10 on where Verstappen was, but he had the opportunity probably to make up 2/10 just on car performance during that corner. So I think the point is, pole was maybe there for like all of these guys. Maybe, and maybe not, but maybe the front row could have been doable. So it's going to be a huge race tomorrow for the championship. So many interesting storylines here. Alonso ends up in P7 because Antonelli gets a 3-place penalty for what happened back in Austria. Behrman's going to start down in P18 despite a great result for him today to get it into Q3, but unfortunately gets the 10-place drop. The two Ferraris, they will feel like it was a real what could have been. Russell will be happy where he is, but it's Max, Piastri, Norris, the front three guys. Piastri, let's say, it stops the bleeding because he was losing to Norris in many a session in a row now over the last couple of weekends, but he puts an end to that when it matters in qualifying, and if he can keep Lando behind, then he will be having a good time tomorrow in terms of the championship. But look, if Max wins tomorrow, is the championship over still? Quite possibly, but if there's drama at the front of the field, as there can well be here at Silverstone, then I wouldn't rule anything out just yet. Where can Hamilton go from P5? Can he get a podium? It's certainly on, but it will have to depend on some drama further ahead. Very much interested to your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.